I'm the Executive Director of the Universal Access Project here at the United Nations Foundation, and we focus on sexual and reproductive health and rights for girls and women around the world. And today I'm really honored to be joined by one of our close partners from the United Nations, Arthur Erken. And Arthur is the Director of the Division of Strategic Communications and Partnerships at the UN Population Fund, otherwise known as UNFPA. And Arthur has been with UNFPA for more than 2 decades, and previously served as the head of the agency in the Bangladesh office. And UNFPA has a really incredible mission. UNFPA works every day to ensure that every pregnancy is wanted, that every childbirth is safe, and that every young person's potential is fulfilled. You operate in more than 150 countries. And UNFPA also sometimes is either the first or the only provider of health services, especially in times of humanitarian crisis, which is the focus of what we'll be discussing today. And, you know, unfortunately, there's quite a few crises happening around the world right now. And as we've seen, when there is a crisis, reproductive health care and family planning for girls and women are not necessarily in that top list of essential services that are provided. And when we look specifically at the crisis impacting the Rohingya community in Myanmar, there are more than 600,000 people who have fled Myanmar into Bangladesh just in the last 2 months. It's considered the fastest growing refugee crisis on the planet right now. And almost a third, 170,000 girls and women are pregnant or nursing as part of that crisis. And we know that, you know, pregnancy doesn't stop in the midst of a crisis. So in addition to just the untold levels of violence, persecution, upheaval that the entire community is grappling with, we know for that 170,000 girls and women who are pregnant and nursing that they have unique challenges in addition. They continue to need access to safe delivery services, they need prenatal care, they need postnatal care, they need access to contraception. And UNFPA is on the front lines. So let me turn to you, Arthur, to hear a little bit more. And give us the big picture context. What's happening? What are your colleagues in Myanmar and Bangladesh seeing right now? And what is UNFPA's response?
Well, I think it's important to understand the crisis. This is, of course, a continuation of what is already going on for many, many decades. The Rohingya population in the northern part of in the Rakhine state, the northwestern part of Myanmar, is a group of people that is probably one of the most deprived populations on earth. And so they have not even basic rights, such as citizenship, for instance. They don't have that. So for a long time, this is a group that has been discriminated against. And when I was a rep in UNFPA, for UNFPA in Bangladesh, we had to deal with the refugee crisis from '92, and I was there in 2007 and 2013. So already this is another wave that happened in late August.
Protracted.
It's a protracted crisis that hasn't been solved. The problem is that for the Myanmaris, these people are not Myanmaris. They are Bengalis. They might not even. They are not even allowed to use the word Rohingyas, which is what they've given themselves. For them, they are Bengalis. They don't belong in Myanmar. And of course, for Bangladesh, they are Myanmaris. So this is really a group in the middle, caught in the middle, and now being forced almost to leave their house. There was apparently a security incident in late August where Rohingya insurgents attacked a security post, and as a response to that, the security forces of Myanmar reacted, which led to this massive outflux of people. And as you rightly say, half of them are women, and a large part of them, thousands of them, are women that are pregnant or have very small babies. And of course, I mean, the thing that we're dealing with is it's already difficult, certainly for me as a man, difficult to imagine what it is to be pregnant in a situation like that. But then imagine that you have to leave everything behind, your house is being burned, and you have to pack up whatever small belongings you have, being pregnant, and then move. And then you hope that at the other side of the border, someone is there who welcomes you, and who then says, you know, you're in a terrible situation, but we're going to take care of you. You have special needs, but these special needs are not forgotten. And I think that's what we see as our mission, to ensure that these women, even though the situation is difficult and will remain difficult, that part has to be taken care of too. In a typical crisis, of course, water, shelter, food is important, and it is important. But for pregnant women and women of reproductive age, because it's not just pregnant women, but women of reproductive age are vulnerable in general anyway, not just for becoming pregnant, but also for gender-based violence or sexual violence that increases in times of crisis. So it's important for the international community, it's important for UNFPA to then say, no, we need to be here and we need to make sure that these women are being protected, can go through their pregnancy safely, are being protected for an unwanted pregnancy, and of course are being taken care of if they are victims of sexual violence, either in their home state, on the way to Bangladesh, and of course we also see that they are very vulnerable in refugee settings.
So tell us a little bit more about the scale of UNFPA's operation and the variety of services that you're providing that population.
We try to do actually the full gamut of reproductive health services. So it starts with antenatal, postnatal, and of course safe delivery. That's one. We are deploying mobile clinics because the space where this happens in the southern part of Bangladesh is already one of the most poorest regions of Bangladesh. And so having an influx of 500,000 or 600,000 refugees overstretches, of course, the capacity. So one of the things we do is, as I said, is mobile clinics. It's also we're deploying midwives, extra capacity to take care of this. And I'm really gratified for that as well, because this started when I was the rep in Bangladesh. We started with the midwifery program, and it's great to see that now women that were trained as midwives, Bangladeshi midwives, are now being deployed to the south of Bangladesh to take care specifically of this, to help the local infrastructure dealing with this extra influx. We're providing reproductive health kits, so in other words, we bring equipment and supplies to the region to ensure that the equipment and the supplies are there to provide postnatal, antenatal, postnatal, and safe delivery. What is also very important, I think, is we provide family planning services. And this is important, as I said, because, of course, a lot of women, certainly those in reproductive age, 15 to 49 roughly, are also vulnerable for unwanted pregnancies. And so we want to make sure that they can protect themselves from that, because probably the last thing you want to have in a situation like that is that you become pregnant at a time when it's really not, when you really don't want that. And that's important because what we also see in this particular crisis is that the basic understanding about family planning and the actual use of it was very low already in Rakhine State in northwestern in Myanmar. So a lot of these families, women and men, come to Bangladesh with very little basic knowledge and use of family planning. So that's an important aspect. And the third one, so it's the maternal health one, the family planning part. The third one is gender-based violence and making sure that victims of gender-based violence and sexual violence are being taken care of, that there's counseling services for these women. We provide safe spaces for those women so that they can be counseled. And this is, of course, very important in the aftermath of what's happening here, because we do see many women already assaulted in their own places on the way to Bangladesh, and as that also we see it increasing in the refugee context, in the settings in southern Bangladesh.
And that's, given all of the headlines around the crisis right now and impacting this population, that theme around targeted attacks against girls and women is something that's really emerging. You've talked a little bit about, you've seen gender-based violence against girls and women and some of the work that you're doing. Tell us a little bit more about why this is a phenomena in this current crisis.
Well, I think it's not unfortunately, peculiar to the situation of the Rohingya refugee. We see it in every crisis, that women and girls particularly are being targeted, for who they are as women. And I think this is something that requires, of course, special attention. The scale is often much larger than what we actually see. There's a lot of stigma around it. But the peculiarity of this group is it is a Muslim population group. the issues around virginity, sexuality is specific, and of course being assaulted for a young girl is really, really terrible. Including going forward. I mean, you know, for her own life, the family honor, and all these issues that come into play. And so the actual scale is hard to measure because, as I said, a lot of women will keep it to themselves. They tend to forget. So let's not talk about it. We have other problems now to deal with. And of course, we try to encourage them to come to our safe space to say, it's okay to talk about it. It's not your fault. This didn't happen because of you. This happened because someone did it to you and used or abused the situation to his advantage. But it's a difficult issue. It's, I think, something that also in the international community we need to think through, because it's one thing to provide some first counseling in a refugee context, but what happens going forward? As said, when I was in Bangladesh in the early 2007 to 13, we were dealing with the crisis of '92, and so you had people that had been 20 years in these camps. Now, they were probably never counseled on issues related to sexual violence, but let's say you have a group now that also stays for a long time in Bangladesh. Yeah, you counsel them, but this will be a lifelong scar. And so what the next phase of this is, of course, to make sure that these services become sustainable and that there is also sustainable funding for it. Because it also happens in a country, Bangladesh, which is not one of the richest countries to begin with. So it will stretch the capacity of Bangladesh. And I think we have to give them credit for the fact that they do what they do. But the international community really has to come to terms with this and support this, and be ready that this is in my view, for the long haul. If history is any indication, this is not a crisis that is going away very quickly, and if at all.
I think it's an important note that it's hitting the headlines, but it's been an issue impacting this population for decades.
Because, as I think it's important, this is a group that no one owns, and I think that is the terrible tragedy of it. So Myanmar thinks they're not Myanmarese, they are Bengalis. Bangladesh thinks, of course, they're not ours, they are from Myanmar. So no one really owns this group. And it's a group with no passports, with no identity.
No cards.
So this is really what strikes at the core of this particular crisis.
I'm thinking, I think sometimes, if you're just sitting in the U.S. or in Washington, D.C., and you see these numbers, 600,000 refugees, or almost a third of them that are pregnant women or nursing, it's like almost overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so, one thing that I would be helpful to hear is there a story that comes to mind or something that keeps you up at night, an example that can really, for those watching today, can really bring home just the intensity of the crisis and what it might be like from the individual perspective of a Rohingya person?
I don't have a personal story. There are many that we are, of course, collecting about this, and my task is really to say, think of you being in that position. It's easy for me to say, okay, this was Halima from Myanmar and she moved, but it's still Halima that I don't know, or Fahana that it's important to suppose you are this 15-year-old or you are the 22-year-old, and it's you through which that this happens, and you have to walk for days through the mud, and it's rainy, it's the end of the rainy season, but it's still there, and you're going into a situation where you absolutely don't know what will happen. Well, how would you feel? And would you not be wanting to have an international community, a country that is there to help you? And I think it's so much important, at least for me, to make it personal for yourself and say, would you, if that happened to you, would you not have an international community that would be there to help you? And that's why this is so important for us and so personal for us to make that story your own story, because the moment it becomes someone else's story, tomorrow I'm forgotten. It's like, okay, this was something, but yeah, there are people like that still also tomorrow on the road, and it could have been you, it could have been your daughter. And I think that is always a challenge for us in any refugee crisis, that as long it's always someone else, of course. And there are so many of these stories of women that, as I said, have on the way have been raped or assaulted, or, as I said, are in the last term of their pregnancy and don't know what will happen on the other side. And of course, we have over 300 deliveries already in the last month. So I mean, there are many of these stories, and we have nice pictures on our website of seeing a newborn baby in the hands of a woman, and that's fantastic.
It's such a universal
But it could be
moment.
you.
Yeah, that is such a universal
or
moment.
Or it could be me. I mean, that's what I'm saying. And that should be the driver of it, because it could be tomorrow you. You don't know. In these situations, it can be anyone at any moment in time. And these are people, it happened now to them. Yesterday it happened in Syria, where we see women have to move their country. This was a middle-income country, people are relatively well off, and you end up in Zatari camp in Jordan. Again, well-educated, it could be you. And yeah, this is I think the challenge that we have, that it's not someone else's story, it's actually your story.
And on that, looking ahead, I heard someone once say that even if you give a little bit, or even if you take a little action, you're more connected to the issue. It's harder just to turn the page or to shut off the nightly news. So what do you recommend for governments? I know one element that's complex is that the U.S. government used to be a top donor to the UN Population Fund, and under the current administration, that funding was zeroed out. How does that impact your work, and what is the opportunity for other governments, the private sector, and individuals watching today to step up and support UNFPA so that we can support all of these individual hundreds of thousands of people who just want access to basic health care and want to be able to take care of their families?
Well, of course, it's unfortunate that the U.S. decided to defund UNFPA, no longer support these type of activities, which they did. They were actually our largest donor in this kind of situations, in humanitarian crisis situations. We hope, of course, that they will reconsider that decision. But at the same time, we do call upon the U.S. government to support, of course, NGOs and others that are working on this the Rohingya crisis in southern Bangladesh, as we do, and of course we appeal to governments also to continue to support UNFPA, which they do. It's also fair to say that there's still a gap in terms of funding, so we continue to appeal to governments to give money, because and I hear often people say, well, money, that's the easiest thing, they always need money. But you also have to realize that a crisis is costly because
it's unexpected.
It's unexpected.
In some cases,
you need to create often additional facilities. As I said, if you picture southern Bangladesh, already the facilities are not, let's say, top class. The Bangladeshi government does whatever it can within its limited means, but of course, when 500,000, 600,000 people in a 2-month period fluctuate, so you need to create additional facilities. That's why we, for instance, set up mobile clinics. We set up safe spaces. We have what we call surge capacity. So you bring in additional staff, you bring in additional equipment and supplies. So it's costly. But it is so needed, because otherwise, these people will be left on their own, and the Bangladeshi government will be left on its own with its limited means. So money is an important factor. Political support is an important factor. So keep on talking about it. And of course, this is a conflict that ultimately has to be solved at the political level. You cannot continue with this. At some point, there has to be a solution be found for the situation that's being faced in Myanmar and Bangladesh. And of course, here's where people, of course, can engage themselves in. So, for instance, in support of an NGO, in support of UNFPA is, of course, also fundraising for its activities, as do others. And I think it's important to be connected to that human story and that human tragedy. We are one race. There's only one race. It's the human race. And as I said, I come back to this. This could be us next time. So it's important to stay connected and to feel part of this this support that's being given to people in need, and that can never stop. That you can never get tired of it. I know it's easy to tune out to this, but if we get immune to that as a human being, I think that's the biggest danger that we're facing, because then these crises actually become, how should I say it, they become, it becomes worthless in the sense that, oh well, just another crisis, who cares?
They're so far away.
They're so far away, that can never happen. So lots of needs still there that need to be fulfilled. Engage yourself in it. It also means start reading up on it. Read stories about this crisis. Read particular stories about the history of this particular group. It is an absolute tragedy. This is, as I said, it's a group that it's unimaginable. The most deprived group. We hear stories. We've had the Syria crisis with many stories in Africa. I don't think many people know the Rohingya crisis, and if anything can come out of it, that people start to read up on what happened to these particular population group for decades, for centuries actually, that would be actually quite good.
You can't forget it.
You can't forget
once
it.
you have that knowledge,
No, definitely.
you can't turn away.
Definitely not.
Well, Arthur, thank you for your time today and for your work and UNFPA's incredible life-saving work in the midst of this crisis. And if you're interested in learning more, please go to UNFPA's website at unfpa.org. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.